Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and today we are going to talk about the reptiles of Doctor Who, the famed long-running British TV show about an alien, the Doctor, who is a Time Lord, a sort of alien with a time machine, and the humans he brings along with him to watch him do stuff. This piece was first performed at the Minnesota Doctor Who Convention Console Room in 2019 in celebration of its guests of honor, Katie Manning, who accompanied the Doctor in his first encounter with the sea devil subspecies of the Silurians, which we will get to, and Niamh McIntosh, winner of the 2012 and 2013 Nobel Prizes for Lizard Woman. How the 2014 prize went to Paul Giamatti, I will never know. So, let's begin with the reptiles with whom these women were involved. No, not that way. What's the matter with you? The Silurians, a species of reptile-derived sentiences from Earth's past. Now, the Silurians get their name in world from the Silurian period, time in Earth's history spanning from 443 million years ago to 419 million years ago. And as you can see, they had fish that looked like spaceships, and that's terrific, but what they absolutely did not have were any reptiles, or indeed amphibians, or really anything in any danger at all of evolving a roughly humanoid shape, such as whose Silurians possess. What we're doing here at the beginning, by the way, is criticizing Doctor Who from the point of view of actual real-world science, which is a thing that you can do until you decide to stop, because it's never going to end by itself. And that's fine. Nobody watching this show is watching this show for a solid science education, and if they are, they need to be spoken to by somebody who loves them. But it is nevertheless the case that if science fiction that sticks as close to real science as it can is sometimes called hard science fiction, Doctor Who is so soft that it is technically a vapor. To its credit, the very Doctor number 3, there's a sequence of them, you understand, as he dies and regenerates, which is to say quits and is recast. The number 3, the very Doctor who coins the term number 3 later revises it, calling them instead Eocenes. This sadly doesn't help much. The Eocene lasted from 56 to 34 million years ago, and was a time when various species of animals would all gather together for ease of painting. Probably they were especially helpful because they were otherwise, as you can see, dead boring. There's the one on top with the crazy head, at least it's trying, and there's the crocodilian at the bottom corner apparently yelling at all of these mammals to get off of its lawn, because this was long after the extinction of the dinosaurs, and this is what the reptiles had been reduced to. So there were reptiles at this point, mean, cantankerous old reptiles. So the potential for intelligent evolution of same does exist, but in a world now dominated by mammals, tedious mammals, this seems like an odd avenue for evolution to take. Probably the best dating of the time of the Silurians, then, comes from an actual Silurian, famed Victorian-era detective, adventuress, and eater of whole humans, Madame Vastra. She puts her origins at 65 million years ago, the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs. This is corroborated further by the events of the episode Dinosaurs in a Spaceship, in which a Silurian space ark is full of dinosaurs from just before their extinction event. This, of course, is a wonderful time for the Silurians to have flourished, even if it did end with them having to build dinosaur space arks. Especially with them having to end it with building dinosaur space arks. No human through all of our varied cultures and history could possibly have known this clarity of purpose. These Silurians would wake up in the morning and think, today I am going to help put dinosaurs in outer space. I have nothing but envy. Other hypotheses as to their origins may be found in the 11th Doctor's reference to the Silurians being 300 million years out of their time, which at least gives us a time when there were reptiles, but after all that with the Silurian and the Eocene, the Doctor has lost his paleontological credibility. Whereas if I had a time machine, I would almost immediately garner so much paleontological credibility that I would become emperor of the universe based on paleontological credibility alone, rather than spend a lot of time having conflicts with angry, yelling R2-D2s. But, priorities. We can also safely discount Vastra's claim to be from the dawn of time as literal, because assuming she means the Big Bang, then this is a time that was almost entirely reptile woman free. I'm not angry, just disappointed. Presumably she was just yanking things. You would think that just being a samurai detective lizard woman married to her maid would be chain yankery enough for the Victorians, but there you have it. My spell check didn't like the word yankery, and my spell check can cram it. There are other names for the Silurians, certainly. They are sometimes called Earth reptiles, which is, of course, precisely similar to calling humans Earth mammals. Technically correct, but lacking that certain something, where that something is anything descriptive or interesting whatsoever. The Doctor also refers to them as Homo reptilia, and what you have to understand is that scientific names are meant to be descriptors of relationships. Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis and Homo heidelbergensis are all close relatives, and you can tell that by the names. And so Homo reptilia would be another sort of hominid, a close relative of ours, and having evolved from us, the Silurians are not related to us, not at all. Pangolins are closer relatives of ours than any reptile, so Homo reptilia is another incredibly wrong name. No person with a time machine should be this bad at paleontology. It is an atrocity and should be brought before the Hague, but I guess he saved the universe sometimes, so whatever. The Silurians remain the name of Silurian remains the name of choice, especially since it sounds all reptile-y and such. And regardless of when they actually lived, the end of their time then is the same. They observed a planetoid hurtling towards Earth and, believing it to be on a collision course, sequestered themselves in underground lairs or built giant space arcs to avert the disaster. But then the planetoid settled into orbit as the moon, and the projected disaster never arrived, and the Silurians stayed asleep or in outer space. Now, of course, the actual moon has been orbiting the Earth for about 4.5 billion years, but we're not even going to get into that. We will mention that if the 65 million year date is correct for the Silurians, that would mean the moon came into Earth's orbit very close to the time when the dinosaurs went extinct, which in Kessen was because a time-traveling space freighter from the 26th century filled with antimatter crashed into the Earth. I'm not making that up, but I bet somebody did. So, this would be a lot of exciting things happening in a fairly compact amount of time, but then, if you think about it, MC Hammer and the Golden Girls both happened in the last 5,000 years, so sometimes it be like that, as I believe the kids are saying these days. Now, the Silurians are, of course, reptile people who ruled the world during the age of some time, creating a grand, advanced, and peaceful culture before being undone by being afraid of the moon. They are remarkably a species with a number of branches. Here we see 3 that have been encountered by the Doctor and his pals. The first is from 1970's Doctor Who and the Silurians, a third Doctor adventure set during the time when he didn't have the TARDIS, his famous time machine, but did have a Who-mobile, and presumably also a Who cave and Who-orangs. Shut up, spell check. He is accompanied by his then-companion Liz Shaw, who is most often remembered for her legs, but who was more importantly an early experiment in companions who have actual jobs, besides thinking the Doctor is great. Obviously, it's nice work if you can get it, but it is hard to find a good graduate program. Long story short, some Silurians are awakened in the English moors and begin setting out reclaiming their planet by releasing a virus to take care of humanity, while the Doctor tries to broker a peace between them and the humans, which is ruined by the individual jerk-facery of both humans and Silurians. When the Doctor first meets a Silurian, he immediately goes to politely introduce himself to it in a scene that is played for laughs, given the obvious monstrosity. That is the open-minded, pacifistic Doctor to a T. Anyway, the virus is defeated, and the Silurians go back into hibernation, and they're bombed into oblivion by the Brigadier, a human military ally of the Doctors. The Doctor will forgive his friend later for this act of open genocide for a very good reason, and that reason is I don't know. These Silurians could hardly be called beautiful unless that's your thing, and fine, whatever, as long as there's consent. And though they do not particularly resemble any known reptile, that is just fine. Indeed, an example of the creativity of creature design in Old Who. Of particular note is the third eye, and what the third eye does is stuff. The Silurians operate their machinery with it. They can use it as a beam weapon. There's telekinesis, mind control, all kinds of stuff like that. It's a tool that does whatever. A sonic screwdriver, the Doctor's technological-themed magic wand, glued to the forehead, only also with violence. And though that, of course, is what scientists would call some nonsense, the third eye is actually a reptilian trait. Several varieties have what is called a parietal eye, a third hole in the forehead that contains a very primitive eye-like structure. It is most developed in the Tuatara, a lizard-like but non-lizard creature of an ancient lineage that is also, as you can see, super adorable. I mean, just look at it. Its parietal eye has a full-scale cornea and retina, though it is covered in scales, and scientists do not know its actual function. Presumably, they use it to operate machinery telekinetically. I mean, it's right there. Checkmate, science. Seen in the middle there, Silurians of this general type, except apparently happier, return in 1984's Warriors of the Deep. Here, the Fifth Doctor brings Tegan and what's-his-name to an undersea base on Earth in 2084. It is attacked by Silurians and Sea Devils, to whom we will get presently, who will ultimately attempt to launch the base's proton missiles, which will set off a chain of mutually assured destruction between humanity's two power blocks. Nothing is given of the nature or even names of these power blocks, but historians believe that it may have been a metaphor for two similar blocks dominating global politics in 1984, though all information about these has been lost. I mean, it was on floppy disks, for God's sake. We can surmise that it was not the US versus the Soviets, because can you even imagine Russia working against America? That's ridiculous. Anyway, the Doctor stops it all, and hooray. These Silurians are similar to their predecessors, though they're a little doughier, as if they've let themselves go. They do have a sort of stegosaurus-looking protrusions on their backs, which is amazing, but most importantly, they appear to have no further use for their third eye, here reduced to a light that flashes when they talk, like a Dalek. Give each of them a plunger, and you'd scarcely be able to tell them apart. And that's it for the Silurians for 24 years, until 2010's 11th Doctor two-parter, The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. Essentially a retelling and updating of the first story. Again, subterranean Silurians are awakened in the UK. Again, the Doctor attempts diplomacy, and again, it all falls apart because some humans are trash, and some Silurians are trash also. But as before, not all of them. The Silurians have never been an identical, monolithic race, as so many non-humans in fiction in general are, but rather vary as individuals and have a variety of motivations and attitudes. And indeed, all of these Silurians look very different from their predecessors. They are much more human and agile-looking, and were described by one of the show's creators as, quote, sleek and lithe and sculptured, unquote, and I feel like maybe they were hitting on Neve McIntosh. More remarkably, they have entirely human faces, because in Doctor Who, everything evolves an entirely human face. If you give it enough time, eventually fish will have human faces, and fishing will be the creepiest thing imaginable. As far as the creation of the show is concerned, we are told that they were given human faces to make them more relatable, being as they are beings meant to be at least partially sympathetic. But people who can't have sympathy for anything without a human face should probably not have any pets, and this also meant that this early maquette for the new Silurians went unused and let us all bow our heads in sorrow. Okay, That's good. Another early concept with the human face featured switcher armor, and sometimes seeing concept art just makes a person sad for the lost world in general. But regardless of how one feels about the human faces, these Silurians do at least have sweet masks that they wear, at least according to non-television sources, which we will be dipping into a little today, but not much, because if we go too far into the non-TV sources, we will never, ever find our way back, and we will all be reduced to helpless insanity, which would be worse than the current situation in which only like 70% of us have been reduced to helpless insanity. As I was saying, according to non-television sources, the new Silurians' mask resembled the actual faces of yet another subspecies of Silurian, pictured here, doing something. Another group of Silurians is Sea Devils, first encountered in 1972's The Sea Devils, a Third Doctor and Joe Grant adventure, which features the Doctor and the Master, one of his nemesis, fencing, and also the Doctor doing a surprising number of karate chops. Again, or rather for the second time, Silurians are awakened. Again, the Doctor attempts negotiations, and again, they don't work because people are terrible. One English naval commander considers the nuclear option, which seems to me, when meeting a couple of creatures from the Black Lagoon, to be maybe overkill. But then I'm not in the Royal Navy. One wrinkle here is provided by the Master, here working with the Sea Devils just out of pure spite for humanity, which is fun. It's actually a bit incongruous. The Silurian stories are generally about enemies with legitimate points of view, which is a nuanced and realistic view of conflict, and so having a character in there who bites the heads off of ducklings and then laughs, ha-ha, seems off-message. The Sea Devils have heads like turtles with huge fins on them, which is awesome, and wear robes made of loose webbing, which is the other thing. Later, in Warriors of the Deep, they get sweet black samurai armor with super pointy shoulders for some reason, but they lose their ears, presumably because they spent all their character points on the armor. That was a role-playing game joke. Are any of you nerds watching Monster Science livestream? It also may be that the samurai armor was influenced by Darth Vader's samurai-influenced armor, but that would mean that Star Wars had influenced something, and that can't happen. The Sea incidentally are given their name in their first appearance by a human, and in their second appearance are referred to as such by the Silurians, as Sea Devils. There is, of course, only one logical explanation for this. No Silurians could figure out what to call this subspecies until a scared sailor yelled out, "Sea Devils," and they were all, "Oh yes, of course, perfect!" Explanations for this wild variance within the species vary. It is often chalked up to natural evolution, though some related creatures having 3 eyes and other ones having human faces would be evolution galore. Let's put it that way. It seems more likely that this all is the result of genetic engineering. The Silurians are stated to be excellent at this. It is a revivification of dinosaurs and their Sonic-style third eyes. Many of the new Silurian individuals resemble each other very closely and are said to be in the same gene chains, which seems like a genetic engineering word because otherwise they'd just call them families. There are those who predict this kind of large-scale genetic alteration in humanity's own future, an idea called transhumanism, which we have discussed here before, in which we will eventually redefine what it means to be human and alter our very bodies at will. This probably will not happen in my lifetime, but if it does, I'm going for this. But for all of these differences, Silurians are a single species and a single civilization, and they have more in common than they have differences, and they know this, which is awfully decent of them, given that the second intelligent species to evolve on Earth gets really whipped up about our hair color and so forth. Silurians live for 200 or 300 years and are generally larger than humans but lighter. They are primarily carnivorous but eat some plants as well. They are written to be ectothermic, which is to say cold-blooded. Their activity and energy levels, though, seem a little high for this, and indeed Madame Vastra's apparent comfort when dealing with sentient snow at one point seems to entirely fly in the face of it. Though, of course, there are reasons besides cold to be ill at ease around sentient snow. I guess it helps that its boss is Ian McKellen's voice. I've lost my train of thought. Okay. Silurians show no actual signs of cold-bloodedness, is the point, though I don't want to imply that Doctor Who writers don't know the biological science, because I have in fact stated that directly a whole bunch already. Silurians are ruled by something called triads, which is maybe Chinese gangsters, but probably not, and is usually described as groups of 3 Silurians, though the roles of the 3 are described variously by various sources. In their first story, a young Silurian kills the group's main leader and becomes leader himself in doing so, which, as political systems go, is super dumb. We're obviously having some serious problems with our system of government, but I'll still take it over murderocracy. The soldiers of the Silurians, at least the new kind, are primarily female. We are told that by the show's creators, because many reptile species have females that are more aggressive than the males. And yes, of course, this created a note of realism that really sang with audiences. Finally, said all of Britain, some acknowledgement of male-female aggression tendencies in sauropsids. In Warriors of the Deep, a Silurian leader insists that the Silurians only engage in defensive war, which sounds enlightened until you realize that every single war in human history has at least sold its populace the war as self-defense on every single side. Tundro's still over there, isn't he? Silurian poetry, we are told in the expanded universe material, is composed of optical illusions and mathematics, and that is provably not what poetry means, but okay. Religion is harder to pin down. Vastra refers to a goddess, and other sources refer to a deity called the lizard god, because Silurians, as we have seen, are terrible at naming things. Or another god called Urmungstandra, because Silurians are amazing at naming things. Yet another source claims that they worship Azathoth, the Lovecraftian chaos god, and are the original authors of the shunned and terrible Necronomicon, because what 2 properties could possibly go together better than Doctor Who with its intellect and romance over brute force and cynicism, and the Cthulhu mythos with its pathetic and limited humanity doomed to futility and insignificance? Perfect. Perfect. Though, and speaking of humanity's futility and insignificance, one common thread in Silurian stories is their familiarity with apes in their own time, and their contempt, therefore, for their descendants. Now, in most of the ages they might have come from, there was nothing even faintly resembling apes. The only exception is the Eocene, and at least one author has suggested that this is evidence in favor of the Eocene origin, and I would like to invite this author to maybe sit down and think about something else for a while. Maybe Black Mirror? That's real good. Still, if you have the Silurians think of humans not as apes but just as mammals, and then consider that the mammals of the Mesozoic, mostly animals in rat-like ecological niches, then their revulsion actually makes more sense. If you suddenly woke up tens of millions of years from now and the planet was ruled by actual sentient rats, you yourself might not want to put your mouth on them. In some stories, Silurians are actually responsible for breeding or engineering apes into humanity, and this creates so many problems with the timeline of human evolution, I'm just going to sigh heavily. You ready? Then here it is. Still, in one version, humanity was created in a breeding program designed to make the apes more flavorful, and that might be my favorite human origin story anywhere ever. As for humans creating Silurians here in the real world, they were invented by Malcolm Hulke, one of the most compassionate of the early Doctor Who writers. In his novelization of Invasion of the Dinosaurs, there is a section written from the Tyrannosaurus's point of view, because Hulke was about that kind of empathy. The idea was to create a break from an earthbound Doctor's constant stream of inventors and of invasions and mad scientists, because we live in a world in which alien invasions and mad scientists could possibly get tedious, and there's a certain beauty in that. Of course, several of the key concepts relating to the Silurians had appeared before or have appeared since. One cited influence is The Coming Race, an 1873 novel by Edward Bulwer-Lytton, which features an ancient underground advanced race described as angelic, and which, as you can see here, seems to have been surprisingly dull. They powered themselves with a mystic energy called Vril, invented for the book, and later adopted by the spiritualist sect called the Theosophists as an actual thing, which is basically like all of us here deciding that Silurians are real and making life decisions based on this. You know what the heck, let's do that. I won't be a cult leader, we'll determine that democratically. And then, whoever we select, if you kill them, you get to be the new leader. Prehistoric reptiles' evolving intelligence is certainly popular and appeared in fiction at least as early as Edgar Rice Burroughs' 1914 At the Earth's Core, with its Mahars, which are evil pterodactyl people with hypnotic powers, and there aren't 20 movies about this, and I don't understand anything. There have been several attempts at scientific speculation about what dinosaurs that evolved sentience might look like. One especially high-profile one is the Dinosauroid, a sculpture unveiled by the paleontologist Dale Russell in 1982, depicting an idea that the theropod Troodon, the dinosaur with the largest brain in proportion to its body, might have wound up looking like if it had not gone extinct. Mostly, as you can see, it looked like a dude. While certainly interesting, this has not aged well in scientific circles, most specifically because, though an upright posture is good for brain growth, there really isn't any reason why an already bipedal animal, its body counterbalanced by a tail, would lose that tail and rear up like this. This is not to say that dinosaurs couldn't possibly have developed sentience or even a tall sort of stance. Many other speculative evolution artists have designed such, all more plausible than Russell's, I'm afraid, because they look like dinosaurs. And then, of course, there are the Dinosaurs from the 1980s cartoon of the same name. I will not be speaking about the Dinosaurs today, not until they respond to my letters. In UFO lore, there is a variety of visitor called the Reptoids or Reptilians, pictured here with the usual level of artistry and skill given to such things. Less a product of sincere sightings, though there are a few, and more a product of people who want to tell you about evil from the stars. The Reptoids are nonetheless reptile men from space, and that's top-notch in my book. The great shame of them, then, is that most of the people who write about them are full-scale incoherent. I mean, I would love to hear about reptoid civilizations, their sinister plans. None of it is a real possibility, but it sounds like some terrific stories. But it is usually incomprehensible ramblings. Here's one book on them, Reality of the Serpent Race and the Subterranean Origin of UFOs, by Commander X. Look, the X family had a baby, and they named that baby Commander. That's not that weird. It's a confidential monograph for your eyes only, and I bought it on Amazon. Anyway, in some versions of these guys, they are in fact dinosaurs who left the Earth and have come to reclaim it. At least I think they are. As mentioned, it's not easy to make a lot of sense out of. Bringing things back to Earth, so to speak, in April of 2018, a study was published detailing the Silurian hypothesis, named for the Doctor Who monster, which is the proposal that we ought to start looking for signs of intelligent life having already evolved on Earth and then gone extinct. It proposes that if we and our apparent ark are to be taken as a template, that civilization doesn't last long enough to leave a fossil footprint, but that we can look at things like sudden, mysterious, major increase in global temperature around 55 million years ago as exactly parallel to what we're doing right now. So, we look for signs of human-like intelligence by looking for the catastrophe left in its wake. Feel how you like about that. It's not wrong. But the Doctor Who Silurian stories are altogether more hopeful. They're stories of tolerance, of finding commonalities with your apparent enemies, stories of empathy in spite of appearance or background. The Silurians are a people to be understood, and not an implacable enemy to be defeated like the Daleks. Don't get me wrong, I like the Daleks. I'm on record as being in favor of any species, religion, sports team, or jazz combo that mainly goes around screaming exterminate. But the Silurians demonstrate that the understanding and the kindness of the Doctor Who stories, and we could all use a bit more of that, is something to cling on to. Well, maybe some of us couldn't use more of that. If any of you here tonight have too much kindness in your life, well, screw you, fall into an open sewer and die. How's that? Is that better? Of course, there's one Silurian who has her own sort of story. I speak, of course, of Madame Vastra, played by Neve McIntosh, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. Here also. This will end soon. I mean, not immediately. Okay, we're good. Madame Vastra is, of course, one of the finest characters ever created in the history of human narrative, and I'll tell you why. First of all, she's a Silurian. As to why that's awesome, please refer to the last 30 minutes. Secondly, she's a genius. She's the model in this world for Sherlock Holmes, only toned down to make her more believable. She says the game's afoot and everything. She's like the Will Ferrell Sherlock Holmes movie that came out a bit ago, only not apparently intentionally terrible. So the opposite of that movie, I guess. She recognizes Time Lord DNA by sight. She figures out where it came from before anyone else. She has a lie-detecting interview format. She is the best. Thirdly, she operates in Victorian London. She's a steampunk character. They don't even need to put pointless gears and goggles on her, though, would it kill them? And so she can be in Victorian-style stories. The Snowman is a fairy tale with the Doctor living on a cloud. The Crimson Horror is a penny dreadful Victorian horror, and so on. And she plays beautifully off the famed Victorian conservatism. She is told that Conan Doyle had to change her character for Holmes because the great detective couldn't possibly be a woman, and that is amazing. Number 4, she is a total badass. She has samurai swords, for God's sake, and she is fully and easily capable of scolding and lecturing the Doctor himself, usually the ultimate genius authority, wherever he goes. And he listens to her. She's like River Song, except she never gives up her bunch of lives for the Doctor, and thank goodness for that. If you don't know what that means, you're going to be okay. And as a distant 5th best thing, she is married to Jenny Flint. She's an openly gay character on a TV show known worldwide, and her homosexuality is the 5th most noteworthy thing about her, and that in and of itself is amazing. It's handled blithely and openly. They flirt wildly, and unlike so many married couples on television, behave as though sometimes they might have sex. Perhaps the best of this is in a moment in The Good Man Goes to War, wherein Vastra is apologizing to Jenny and says, "I don't know why you put up with me," and then the very next thing that happens is that she shoots out her 12-foot-long tongue at someone. I don't have a joke for that. I'm just so happy right now. Admittedly, their kiss in Time of the Doctor is weird. There's a huge setup where Vastra is simply transferring oxygen to Jenny's lungs, that's all, but then there's a big close-up of the kiss. They're married. They're obviously attracted to each other. We know these things unequivocally, so why the excuse to kiss? Anyway, she and Jenny have a Sontaran sidekick called Strax, where Sontarans are, of course, violent potatoes, and together they're called the Paternoster Gang, and the fact that there isn't a Paternoster Gang spin-off is yet more evidence that we are living in the darkest timeline. Which reminds me, at a panel at the convention where I first gave this talk, Taylor Sisko proposed a Paternoster Gang set in the 1930s, which I dubbed Paternoster Noir, and I'm saying that in a recorded forum now in case of later copyright disputes. Paternoster Noir, you guys. I'm going to have a room full of money which I will dive into like Scrooge McDuck. Moving on. Of course, you can't have a show about time travel without dinosaurs. Which is not to say that Doctor Who hasn't tried. Decades and decades of time travel stories, and there have been exactly 5 of them with dinosaurs in them at all, unless you count the one where all of history happens at the same time, and Churchill as a Silurian doctor, and pterosaurs are a common pest, and nothing makes any sense whatsoever. A time travel show without dinosaurs is like a hot apple pie without any part of the hot apple pie. But then see how the dinosaurs started out. You perhaps begin to understand. The first dinosaur in Doctor Who appeared in Doctor Who and the Silurians as a pet and guard of the reptile people, and it looked like this, which isn't too bad until you look at it for a few seconds. Referred to by the television crew as Bertram the Friendly Monster, it is not identified in the show, but is called a Tyrannosaurus in the novelization. This is later retconned into Bertram being an entirely genetically engineered animal, since it has too many fingers for a tyrannosaur, and also because many cited that a Tyrannosaurus was more than 7 feet tall. Pertwee, playing the Doctor, really tries to sell it, though, and you've got to give him that. Not a great start, but not the end of the world. A lot of Doctor Who monsters were much, much stupider at first, and I bet many of you can think of some. But then, in 1974, there was Invasion of the Dinosaurs, yet another third Doctor adventure, this one involving dinosaurs being brought to modern London to cause chaos and all that sort of thing. I don't remember the exact master plan, but that is in part because bringing dinosaurs to major cities to terrorize them is a vital and indefensible part of just so many master plans for obvious reasons. If I've got a problem that bringing dinosaurs to terrorize major cities can't solve, I don't want to know about it. And so, there is an Apatosaurus, not too bad so far, and a Triceratops, okay, though you need to understand that you're not seeing it move right now, and a Pterosaur, boy, and of course a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, these may look bad, lumpy, and unpleasant, but what you've got to understand is that they move like someone lazily dragging a sack of potatoes by a string. Here's the Tyrannosaur attacking the sauropod, or kissing it maybe, or just dragging its clenched teeth across the herbivore's forehead. It's all pretty ridiculous, even for 1970s Doctor Who effects, and many ascribe the disappearance of the dinosaurs from the show for several decades to the terribleness of the dinosaurs here. It should be mentioned that these dinosaurs look especially terrible to the modern eye. 1974 is the age in real paleontology of tail-dragging, slow, idiotic dinosaurs, now extinct out of pure suckiness and only having dominated the Earth for over 150 million years by accident, seemingly. It was a stupid time in paleontology, but that's not Doctor Who's fault. And so, dinosaurs appeared only once more before the reboot in 2005. Evil Time Lord the Ronnie was once seen to be cultivating embryonic tyrannosaurs, but that's about it. She also had a plan to go back in time and undo the extinction of the dinosaurs just to see how they would develop, and I have switched sides so hard right now. Dinosaurs have appeared twice in the relatively short run since the Ninth Doctor debuted, the so-called New Who. The first of these was Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, which was the second draft after Woolly Mammoths on a Gondola. Here at last we had dinosaurs that look great, in part because of the advancements in special effects technology, and in part because of the show's advancements in special effects procuration, which is to say, money. Most of the dinosaurs here are ones found in the Hell Creek Formation, a series of fossil-bearing rocks from the very end of the Mesozoic, found in western North America and Canada. So there's a Tyrannosaur. Contrary to popular belief, some dinosaurs are not Tyrannosaurs, and a Triceratops, and some delightful Ankylosaurs as well. There are also Pteranodons, which actually lived 5 million years before these other dinosaurs, which doesn't sound like much given the time frames we're working with, but then 5 million years ago our bloodline looked like this. Exactly like this. And finally, there are raptors. There always have to be raptors anymore, which is fine for two reasons. One, various kinds of raptor were in fact very common in the second half of the Mesozoic. And two, raptors are totally sweet. The ones in this Silurian arc are a little bit bigger than any of the ones that lived among Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, but I'm going to allow it, especially because they have evidence of feathers there on the back. Weak, cowardly evidence of feathers, but still better than the Jurassic Park movies. The most recent dinosaur to appear in this series is the enormous theropod who appears in the 12th Doctor's first episode. Often called a tyrannosaur, because that's the only kind of dinosaur, this creature is in fact much, much larger than any tyrannosaur, or indeed any dinosaur at all. Vastra and Jenny argue about its plausibility, and really in the end it's more of a city-wrecking kaiju in scale than a proper animal. And in the real world, kaiju can't exist, because the strength of bone and muscle does not increase proportional with size at the same rate that weight does, and so there comes a point where an animal would be so big it would collapse into goo, rarely a beneficial evolutionary adaptation. But of course, Doctor Who is free of such constraints of boring real science, and nowhere is this more welcome than here. The impossibility of kaiju is the worst science of all science. Maybe atomic bombs are worse, I guess. The other really significant sort of reptilian Doctor Who would be the Ice Warriors, the ancient inhabitants of now-dying Mars. We know them to be reptiles, though visually this only manifests as the scales on the armor they constantly wear, and if anybody was taking that as evidence of their reptile nature, then I bet cosplay makes them so confused. The Ice Warriors wear this armor at all times. It is described as enhancing strength, reactions, spectral sensitivity, communication, and waste management. And I'm just going to stop us right there. Maybe let's move on. We finally see the creature in the armor in 2013's 12th Doctor story, Cold War, just in glimpses, but they are pretty cool looking, and it's worth it. The Ice Warriors demonstrate that there are certain commonalities between reptile people regardless of their planet of origin. Like the Sea Devils, the Ice Warriors were first given their name by a human after a failed invasion from 5,000 years ago is found frozen in ice, presumably next to Captain America. And then the Ice Warriors start using it to refer to themselves. The lesson: reptile people don't come up with names for their own species, or are just very polite about what they think other people want to call them. It's a particular shame because in the lore, the Ice Warriors were genetically engineered long ago by the now extinct Gandarins, who named them the Saurian Evolutionaries, which is completely amazing, and also the name of my signature fragrance. The Ice Warriors start off as straight-up invading aliens, in one case sending a fungus to Earth that will change our atmosphere to one that we cannot live in, but that is suitable to Ice Warriors. This fails because the fungus is vulnerable to water, and having your weapon's weakness be water and sending it to a planet that has water pretty much everywhere is a strong choice. Later, however, the Ice Warriors renounce violence, becoming allies of humanity and the Doctor. Indeed, we are told that the Ice Warriors had not always been warlike, but had been peaceful artists with a gift economy, but were reduced to belligerence when their global environment went haywire. Sounds reasonable enough, but if it doesn't to you, just wait 50 years. The lesson: reptile people are morally ambiguous, sometimes good, sometimes bad. In Cold War, set in 1983, an Ice Warrior attempts to fire off missiles in such a way as to provoke a global conflict between two superpowers, precisely as the Sea Devils will later attempt to do in 2084. The lesson: reptile people love firing off missiles to provoke global conflicts between two superpowers in 80s decades. They love it. Can't get enough of it. The Ice Warriors, we are told, are cold-blooded, and also that they prefer the cold, which is more or less the opposite of how cold-bloodedness works. The lesson: reptile people are cold-blooded, except for no, they're not. The Ice Warriors first appeared in a 1967 serial named after them. They were originally intended to replace the Daleks, which the show was attempting to retire, meaning that the Daleks would all go live in a building together and watch television and complain about younger Daleks. Obviously, this didn't take, though there are about a half-dozen Ice Warrior stories. They are obviously no Daleks, possibly in part because they look like this. Sometime recent showrunner Stephen Moffat has referred to them as the default of rubbish Doctor Who monsters, but then we all get grumpy sometimes. The armor of the Ice Warriors is actually kind of cool, though, of the Ice Empress is actually kind of cool, though, with the hair-like cables and the teeth and such. The lesson: reptile women are more awesome than reptile men. Of course, there are countless other reptile people in the Doctor Who universe, far too many to detail here, especially if you count the expanded universe stuff. We'll discuss just a few. The Draconians are popular. Indeed, Pertwee said that they were his favorite aliens because they had faces you could talk to. The Draconians are bound by honor and tradition. They are big fans of their swords, and they make sake and have weapons called shuriken, and presumably possess nunchuck skills as well. Nunchuck, spell check, that's 3 strikes. Anyway, between this and their dragon name and their general look, the Draconians are clearly meant to be space Asians, which is, of course, disappointing. The Lacertians are golden-scaled primitives and slaves of the Rani, and it is unrecorded whether or not they got their hairstyle from Auntie Entity from beyond Thunderdome, or whether it was the other way around. The Rani controls them using deadly insects, because the Rani, as we have seen, is pretty good with the thinking outside the box. Davros is served by an entity called Colony Sarf, who is basically a stack of snakes. His servant is a stack of snakes. I feel like things could really turn around for the Daleks if they maybe just hired a decent PR firm. If you look at this picture and think about it a little bit, you realize that one of these snakes must have some human eyes in the middle of its back and a human nose, and that is why you probably shouldn't think about it. The seventh Doctor briefly encounters red reptilian aliens called Posicarians, but they're not at all interesting, and let's skip them. The brothers Hop Pyleen show up to watch the destruction of the Earth from another group of cold-blooded people. And there are those who would be startled to hear that background characters appearing briefly in a single episode of a TV show have been given names and metabolisms, but these people don't know nerds. The Chelonians are mentioned in the Pandorica Opens, and they have a cool-sounding name, Chelonians. It actually means turtle, and that's what they are, and sad trombone.wave. They have a warlike empire and are described as kind of stupid and appear in a lot of expanded universe material, and it's hard to puzzle out exactly why, though, to be fair, turtle people do have a certain popularity elsewhere. Between the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Vastra's swords, and the Draconians, there seems to be an implicit connection between Japanese culture and reptile people here in the West, and please support my Kickstarter to find a study on why that makes any sense at all. Why in God's name? Reptile people also appear in the Doctor Who spin-off television. In Torchwood, we hear of the Dogons, who have 13 eyes, the sixth of which allows you to look at your life clearly, which is not how vision works. Look at your life is just a figure of speech, but boy, I want this eye anyway. Looking at my life as I am currently able to, on second thought, maybe I don't. I am super curious about which of a being's 13 eyes is its sixth, because maybe that would help me figure out which of my eyes is number 1 and which one is number 2. The leaf dragon in the Torchwood episode Class sounds like art you'd purchase at a Renaissance festival, but instead is huge and bioluminescent and skins people instantly and then drags them off to drink their blood and travels via tears in space-time. And I don't know, if you're looking to replace the Daleks, maybe this is a better direction to go in than portly guys with windows for eyes. I'm just spitballing here. The Jixen appear in the Australian Doctor Who spin-off K9, which features the titular robot in a dystopian future London with pitch-black robot state police. And it is also a children's show, and it is real confusing, and I wish they pulled it off, but holy Toledo, they did not. The Jixen are, of course, more turtle people, because everyone loves turtle people. If you don't love turtle people, then wrong. Yes, you do. The Betrusians appear in the novel St. Anthony's Fire. They have two factions, the monotheistic Ismech and the polytheistic Kutch, which are in a state of constant war. They operate at a steampunk level of technology with zeppelins and everything, and the world could just use more of this sort of thing. The novel The Eyeless features the Stegosians, described by the 10th Doctor as fascist dinosaur people. They look like humanoid stegosaurs, and I think we can all agree that the fact that they're called Stegosians is a really remarkable coincidence. There do not appear to be any illustrations of them anywhere, so here's Stegron, a C-list Spider-Man villain who will be appearing in such future Marvel Cinematic Universe movies as none of them. An ongoing comic in Doctor Who Adventures magazine puts it to us that between his companions Amy Pond and Clara Oswald, the 11th Doctor had a companion called Decky Flamboon, a shape-shifting Branchirian. They meet another Branchirian called Monty Punions, and you know what? We're just going to sail on past all of this. Let's look instead at the alternate universe where everyone's a cartoon animal and Liz Sinclair becomes Lizzie Sinclair and the Doctor is named TARDIS Tales for some presumably indefensible reason, and on second thought, let's not look at that either. What we can look at is the cybersaurs described in the audio drama The Brimstone Kid as a species of half-cyborg, half-lizards, and that's it. That's all you get. Further information on the cybersaurs, which is certainly a shame because I bet they would be friends with me. Honorable mention among Doctor Who reptile people goes to Bosk, the bounty hunter from Star Wars, and demonstrably not a Doctor Who character, but, fun fact, or at least fact, his flight suit is an old Doctor Who costume worn by an astronaut in 1966 as the 10th Planet, which was the first Cybermen story. So, should someone create a fan fiction in which the galaxy far, far away is a corner of the Doctor Who universe and Bosk comes to Earth and steals some guy's uniform? No! And then, of course, not all of the reptiles unique to Doctor Who are sentient. Perhaps the most famous of these is the Mirka, a living weapon of the sea devils, a sort of pantomime horse sea serpent centaur with a tail that delivers bioelectric shocks. This creature is widely maligned in the fandom due to its goofy appearance, extremely awkward movement, and somewhat sloppy construction. But if we start condemning all old Doctor Who monsters for these three things, then that gets even worse than criticizing the science. It's actually an interesting, unique design. Give us a modern CGI sea serpent centaur bioweapon, and we'll add that to our Silurians are real religion yesterday. The Scarazan certainly deserves mention, and there are two things you need to know about the Scarazan. It is the Loch Ness Monster, and it is from outer space, used by the alien Zygons as a source of milk. Hold on a minute. Yes, that's right, as a source of milk. In one audio drama featuring the Zygons, we get to hear them hungrily drinking from the Scarazan's teats, presumably because the fandom demanded it. Now, this, of course, makes it not a reptile. Lactation is pretty much a definitive mammalian trait. But, oh no, it's science again. There are almost going to be new reptiles in the Silurian reboot. Instead of people sinking into the earth, the inhabitants of the troubled Welsh village in the beginning were going to be besieged by armosaurs, fast, dangerous dinosaurs which would come out of the earth rolled up into balls at first. This was switched out for the quicksand effect for budgetary reasons, and not because anybody thought that quicksand would be cooler. As we have seen, the creators of Doctor Who make some decisions that are difficult to understand from time to time, but come on. Other planets have their own analogues to prehistoric reptiles. Scaros has magnodons, which are basically metallic dimetrodons held together by magnetic fields, and Gallifrey once had gigantosaurs, about which little has been said, but they're already called gigantosaurs. What do you want? Now, the presence of dinosaur-like animals on multiple planets, especially with a similar cycle of extinction as on Gallifrey, is once again not terribly scientifically plausible, but in a fantasy such as this, of course there are space dinosaurs. We all know that dinosaurs are awesome, and if you disagree, please meet with me sometime after the show, and we will have a fist fight. Also, hopefully you already know why reptile people are cool as well, and they may well be the second most popular variety of sci-fi fantasy beast person right after cat people. There's something liminal about them that makes them alluring. Reptiles stand on the boundary of the familiar and the alien, having four limbs and eyes and teeth and so on, like we do, but also having scales and slow, quiet, unassuming metabolisms, like we don't. And the alien but familiar is a big part of what Doctor Who is all about, a celebration of the unfamiliar, of the bizarre, while simultaneously not making things too unfamiliar that we can't possibly see ourselves in them. Sympathetic reptile people, like us but not like us, weird but identifiable, is really Doctor Who at its best.